Well, good morning. My name is Willie Lawson, and welcome to the Morning Report. Listen, today we're going to talk about government shutdowns because I know we've got another one looming. We always seem to have another one looming. So you want to know more about it? Let's start at the beginning. Because this whole circus hasn't always been with us. Government shutdown wasn't even a phrase Americans knew about until the 1970s. And before that, Congress passed budgets. What a concept. Agencies spent money. Of course they did. And even when deadlines were missed, the machinery of government kept running. The light didn't flicker. The mail didn't stop. Nobody used the phrase non-essential workers. So we didn't know, first of all, what's changed. In 1974, there was a Congressional Budget Act. The seed of the shutdown politics was planted then in 1974, when your host was only a mere 14 years old, when Congress passed the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act. On paper, the law was about discipline, forcing Congress to create a calendar for budgeting and preventing presidents from hoarding funds. But one consequence was very clear. If Congress did not pass an appropriation, agencies couldn't spend. So for the first time, deadlines mattered. For the first time, the threat of a pause existed. And for the first time, it didn't take long for politicians to notice they'd been handed a new weapon. Now, the first shutdowns came under President Jimmy Carter back in the 70s. Now, I know that we shouldn't, I learned from my parents and grandparents that we shouldn't speak ill of the dead. But what I've added since I've become an adult is, but we can tell the truth. Again, the first shutdowns happened under President Jimmy Carter in the late 70s. They were tiny compared to what we see now, lasting only a few days. Back in 1977, there were 3 shutdowns in quick succession. One over abortion funding that lasted a few days, and in 1978, a brief shutdown over public works spending, and 1979, another short one tied to defense authorizations. So in total, Carter presided over 5 shutdowns. Most people didn't even realize they'd happened. Agencies furloughed some employees, but essential services kept rolling. And the press didn't play it up the way they do now, of course. Wonder why that is. But anyway, still, the president was set. Politicians had learned if you can't get what you want in negotiations, you can just threaten to stop the whole show. So I guess in this particular case, one monkey does stop the show. Now, then came Ronald Reagan, and the shutdown politics graduated from sideshow to a recurring drama. Between 1981 and 1989, there were 8 separate shutdowns, each lasting anywhere from 1 day to 3 days. The fights were over spending levels, nuclear weapons funding, welfare expansion, foreign aid, and domestic programs. Does any of this sound similar? Sound familiar to you? The playbook was refined. Furlough some workers, close some offices, create visible discomfort, then rush back with a deal. Now, none of these shutdowns have produced any lasting savings. Government spending continued to grow, but both parties now had fully embraced shutdowns as a bargaining tool. A few more details. In 1981, a 2-day shutdown over defense spending and domestic budget cuts. In 1982, two shutdowns, one over funding for the MX missile systems, another over some water projects. In 1984, a one-day shutdown over crime funding and water projects. In 1986, there were a three-day shutdown over Contra aid for Nicaragua. And in 1987, a one-day long pause over welfare expansion and public works. Now, what mattered wasn't the substance, it was the performance. By the mid-'80s, America had already seen 13 shutdowns in less than a decade. Now, the mechanics of this, it was during that period that the language that we still use today, and we saw again during the COVID period, were essential and non-essential. Workers entered the lexicon. Essential workers, those in public safety, national security, or core operations, military, border patrol, air traffic control, they kept working. Sometimes without immediate pay. And then there were the non-essential workers, administrative staff, clerical positions, agencies considered optional. They were furloughed and told to stay home. Now, this split was arbitrary. A scientist in one department may be furloughed while a nearly identical role in another seemed essential. The point wasn't logic. The point was leverage. And once the term non-essential became common, the stagecraft was locked in. Closing a park or a museum was no longer about saving money. It was about optics. It gave TV cameras something to record. Now, speaking of media, it's worth noting that the press in the 1980s covered shutdowns, but they weren't yet treated like existential crises. They were reported as inconveniences, budget squabbles, political chess moves, the full-blown panic theater, the countdown clocks, the screaming headlines. Oh, that will come later. Still, the cycle was established. Congress misses deadlines, agencies furlough workers, politicians trade barbs, and a deal restores everything with back pay. This is the pattern that emerges. By the end of the Reagan years, the pattern was very clear. Deadline pressure. Both sides pushed negotiations to the brink. Partial shutdown. A sliver of government pauses. Visible things close. And there's media attention. Stories highlight the inconvenience. Then a deal is cut. Congress passes a funding bill. The president signs it. All the back pay is approved. Furloughed workers get their money eventually. Wash, rinse, repeat. Shutdowns had become part of the American political playbook, not at the last resort, but as a standard tactic. So, why spend time on these early shutdowns? Because they exposed the scam from the beginning. None of them reduced spending long term. Federal outlays kept growing year after year after year. Every one of them ended up with back pay. Furloughs were temporary stress, not real cuts. The disruptions were selective. Only visible things closed, while the machine kept humming. Both parties participated. Carter, Reagan, Democrat Congress, Republican Congresses all played the same game. From the start, shutdowns weren't about discipline. They were about leverage, optics, and politics.